I wore my foxtail plug to jury duty to help me focus, but it fell out when I stood up for the judge. The sound it made was a soft, dense thump, a sound no one would have noticed on a busy street, but in the cathedral-like silence of a courtroom where the only other noise was the collective rustle of 20 people rising to their feet, it was a gunshot. A fluffy, ginger and white-tipped gunshot. It landed directly between my sensible black flats, a vibrant splash of wildness against the worn beige linoleum. For a split second, my brain refused to process it. It was just an object, a strange bit of lint, a lost piece of a costume. But my body knew. A cold wave of dread washed over me, starting in my stomach and radiating outward, leaving my skin clammy and my ears ringing. Time stretched like warm taffy. I could feel every single pair of eyes in that room drift downward from the judge's face to the floor, and then, inevitably, to me. I was Juror Number 7, the one in the slightly too big blazer I'd bought at a thrift store to look respectable, the one who had been trying so desperately to just blend in, to be a good and normal citizen performing her civic duty. Beside me, a woman whose perfume smelled aggressively of lavender let out a tiny, scandalized gasp. I didn't dare look at her, or at the young guy on the other side who I had seen sketching in a notebook earlier. My gaze was fixed on the tail. My tail, lying there like a fallen squirrel, its fluffy fibers mocking the sterile, solemn environment. The judge, a man with a face like a carved slab of granite, paused mid-sentence. His eyes, magnified by his glasses, found the object on the floor, and a deep furrow formed between his white eyebrows. He wasn't angry. He was confused. Utterly, profoundly confused. And that was so much worse. You have to understand, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a kink thing. Not in this context. My brain is a loud, crowded place, a constant buzz of 1,000 different radio stations playing at once. The light pressure, the sensory input, it grounds me. It's like a weighted blanket for my nervous system. It turns the chaotic noise into a single, manageable hum, allowing me to actually focus on one thing. And jury duty, with its endless waiting and periods of intense, detail-oriented listening, felt like the ultimate test of my faulty wiring. I thought it would be my secret weapon, a discreet way to be the best juror I could be. Discreet. The irony was so thick, I felt like I was choking on it. My secret, my weird little coping mechanism, was now Exhibit A in the case of my own social annihilation. The judge cleared his throat, a sound that echoed in the silent room. "Juror Number 7, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up my spine. He didn't look at me directly, not yet. He was still staring at the tail, as if trying to solve a complex legal puzzle. Is that item yours?" Every head turned. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze, a physical pressure on my skin. The lavender woman, Mrs. Gable, I think her name was, leaned away from me as if I might be contagious. The silence pressed in, demanding an answer. I could lie. I could say it fell from the ceiling, that a prankster threw it, that I'd never seen it before in my life. But it was right there, between my feet. My face was already the color of a ripe tomato. There was no plausible deniability here. My mouth was dry, my tongue felt thick and useless. I managed a small, pathetic nod. A little squeak of a sound escaped my throat. "Yes," I whispered, the word getting lost in the vast, judgmental space of the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge finally lifted his eyes to meet mine. The confusion was still there, but now it was joined by a flicker of something else. Pity? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. He just held my gaze for what felt like an eternity. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I wanted to rewind time, to wake up this morning and choose to wear normal, boring underwear like a normal, boring person. I willed myself to move, to do something, anything to end this waking nightmare. My hand trembled as I bent down, my knees cracking in protest. The movement felt slow, deliberate, each second a fresh wave of humiliation. I scooped up the tail, the faux fur soft and familiar against my clammy palm, and quickly shoved it into my blazer pocket. When I straightened up, the room was still staring. The young guy next to me, Leo, had his hand over his mouth, but his shoulders were shaking slightly. He wasn't looking at me with disgust, though. When he caught my eye, he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, a silent acknowledgement of the sheer absurdity of the moment. It was the smallest possible act of solidarity, but it felt like a life raft. The judge sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of his entire career. He adjusted his robes. "Bailiff," he said, his voice returning to its authoritative tone, "we will take a 15-minute recess." Then his eyes found me again, locking me in place. "Juror Number 7, a word in my chambers. Now." The bailiff, a burly man with a kind but weary face, put a gentle hand on my elbow. It wasn't a gesture of arrest, but one of guidance, like he was leading a confused ghost out of the room. The walk from the jury box to the heavy oak door behind the judge's bench was the longest 20 feet of my life. I didn't dare look at the other jurors, but I could feel their stares burning into the back of my thrift store blazer. I could feel the defendant and the lawyers and the court stenographer all watching this bizarre, unscheduled intermission. My footsteps, usually quiet in my sensible flats, sounded like thunderclaps on the linoleum. The tail in my pocket felt like a lead weight, a constant lumpy reminder of my monumental error in judgment. The bailiff opened the door to the judge's chambers and ushered me in, the latch clicking shut behind me with a terrifying finality, sealing me in with my fate. The room smelled of old books and stale coffee. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, crammed with letter-bound legal tomes that looked like they hadn't been opened in a century. The judge was already there, standing by his massive desk, having shed his black robes. He was just a man now, in a white shirt and a tie, but he still radiated an aura of absolute authority. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, pinching the skin between his thumb and forefinger as if trying to stave off a migraine. I just stood there, a few feet from the door, my hands clasped in front of me, trying to make myself as small as possible. The silence was different in here. It wasn't the vast, public silence of the courtroom. It was a dense, private silence that felt much heavier. He motioned toward a stiff-backed leather chair opposite his desk. I sat, my movements jerky and robotic. He sat down, leaned forward, and folded his hands on the blotter. He didn't look at me for a long moment, instead staring at his own interlaced fingers. "Juror Number 7, he began, his voice much softer now, stripped of its courtroom boom. "I have been a judge for 22 years. I have seen defendants try to represent themselves using sock puppets. I have had a lawyer cite precedent from Star Trek. I once had a witness who claimed to be a time traveler." He finally looked up, his eyes clear and piercing. "But I have never, in 2 decades, had a juror drop a tail." He said the word tail as if it were a foreign object in his mouth, something he wasn't quite sure how to pronounce. He wasn't mocking me. He was, I realized with a fresh wave of horror, genuinely trying to understand. I can explain," I stammered, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. It's not what you think. It's not a joke or a protest or anything like that." He just waited, his expression unreadable. So I told him. The words came out in a clumsy, mortified rush. I told him about the noise in my head, the constant static that made it impossible to latch onto a single thought. I tried to explain how certain kinds of sensory input, like pressure or a specific texture, could cut through it all. I used the weighted blanket analogy, and my voice cracked. I told him I just wanted to be a good juror, to be able to pay attention to the testimony, to do my civic duty properly. I told him I thought it would be my own private, weird little secret. A tool, not this. By the end of my rambling, tear-choked explanation, I was staring at my own hands, twisted into a knot in my lap, unable to meet his gaze. The silence that followed was profound. I braced myself for the verdict. Dismissal, a fine for contempt, maybe a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. I was pretty sure you couldn't bring personal sensory regulation devices of a furry nature into a federal courthouse. The judge let out a long, slow breath. "My wife," he said, and the non sequitur was so jarring it made me look up. "She knits, obsessively. When her mother was sick, she knit an Afghan the size of a car. Said the repetitive motion was the only thing that kept her from climbing the walls, the click-clack of the needles. He picked up a pen from his desk and started tapping it rhythmically against a legal pad. Tap, tap, tap. Everyone's got a thing, I suppose, a way to quiet the noise. My breath hitched. I had expected judgment, anger, even disgust. I had not, in any possible scenario my frantic brain had cooked up, expected a flicker of empathy. He wasn't condoning it, but he wasn't condemning me either. He was contextualizing it, fitting my bizarre little secret into a larger pattern of human behavior he could recognize. However, he continued, his voice firming up again, returning to the law, the courtroom is a place of decorum, of focus, and that focus must be on the proceedings, not on unexpected accessories. He gestured vaguely toward my pocket. Your fellow jurors were distracted. The legal counsel was distracted. I was distracted. That compromises the integrity of this entire process. He stood up, signaling the end of our bizarre conference. I am not going to hold you in contempt. I believe your intentions, however misguided your methods, were sincere. A small measure of relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. But I need to consider whether you can continue to serve. Your presence may now be a permanent disruption. He walked to the door and opened it. The bailiff was waiting outside. Go with the bailiff. He'll take you back to the jury assembly room. Wait there. Do not discuss this with the other jurors. I will inform you of my decisions shortly. He gave me one last look, a complex mix of pity and professional frustration, and then turned back to his desk. The door closed, and I was back in the hallway, my future as Juror Number 7 and my reputation as a normal human being hanging by a thread. The bailiff, Frank, didn't say a word as he led me down a different corridor, one I hadn't seen before. It was lined with beige, scuffed walls and smelled faintly of floor wax. My mind was a whirlwind of the judge's words. My wife, she knits. It was the strangest life raft, that little detail. It didn't absolve me, but it told me he saw a human being in front of him, not just a freak show. Frank stopped in front of a door marked Jury Assembly and opened it. The room was vast and empty, filled with rows of chairs bolted to the floor, all facing a blank television screen. It was where we had all gathered that first morning, 100 strangers waiting to see if our names would be called. Now it was just me. He gestured for me to sit and then took up a post by the door, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't guarding me so much as waiting with me. The silence in here was worse than in the judge's chambers. It was cavernous, echoing with my own frantic thoughts. I sank into one of the stiff plastic chairs and stared at the industrial-grade carpet, trying to regulate my breathing. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. I imagined the scene back in the courtroom. The judge would be explaining the delay. What would he say? Would he tell them? The thought made my skin crawl. I pictured the other jurors whispering, the woman who looked like a kindergarten teacher, the young man with the tech company hoodie, the stern-faced grandmother. They had seen it. They had seen my weird, pathetic little secret tumble out onto the floor of a federal courthouse. They probably thought I was a pervert, a prankster, or just plain insane. My attempt to be a better juror, to be more focused and present, had backfired so spectacularly that I had become the single greatest distraction in the room. I had derailed a legal proceeding. I had become the sock puppet, the Star Trek lawyer, the time-traveling witness. I was the anecdote the judge would be telling at dinner parties for the next 20 years. The mortification was a physical thing, a hot, heavy blanket that threatened to suffocate me. I closed my eyes and pressed the heels of my hands into my sockets, trying to push the images away. The door opened, making me jump. It was Frank. He just nodded his head. Time to go. My stomach plummeted. Was I going to be escorted out of the building? Was I going to be handed a fine? I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of jelly and followed him back down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs with each step. We weren't heading for an exit, though. We were heading back to the courtroom. This was somehow worse. He was going to dismiss me publicly. I was going to have to do the walk of shame in front of everyone. As we reached the heavy oak door, Frank paused and put a hand on my shoulder. He leaned in slightly and said, his voice a low rumble, "Just breathe, kid. It's almost over." It was a small kindness, but it felt monumental. He opened the door, and the low hum of the courtroom washed over me again. Every head turned. The judge was on his bench, his face an impassive mask. He waited until I was standing beside my chair in the jury box before he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he announced, his voice carrying its familiar authority, "I apologize for the delay. After a brief consultation, we have resolved the procedural matter. We will now continue with the testimony." He looked directly at me. "Juror Number 7, you may be seated." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't dismissed. I was staying. I sank into my chair, my entire body trembling with a confusing mix of profound relief and absolute terror. I was still here. I had to sit here for days, maybe weeks, next to these people. I could feel their awareness of me. It was like a change in the room's atmospheric pressure. I didn't dare look at any of them, keeping my eyes fixed on the witness stand, where a forensic accountant was preparing to speak. For the rest of the afternoon, I tried to focus, but my carefully constructed coping mechanism was gone, and in its place was a raw, buzzing self-awareness. Every time I shifted in my seat, I felt like all eyes were on me. Every time someone coughed, I was sure it was a reaction to my presence. The noise in my head was back, louder than ever, but now it was layered with shame. I found myself watching the judge. He was tapping his pen. Tap, tap, tap. A steady, quiet rhythm against his legal pad. I focused on it, the click-clack of the needles. A way to quiet the noise. I started tapping my own finger, ever so slightly, against my thigh, hidden beneath the wooden ledge of the jury box. I timed it to his. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, painstakingly, the accountant's words about financial ledgers and offshore accounts began to cut through the static. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A new anchor in a storm of my own making. When the judge finally dismissed us for the day, the tension was unbearable. We all stood, a silent, awkward group. I kept my head down, grabbing my coat and bag, trying to become invisible. I walked out of the jury box behind Juror 8, the grandmotherly woman. I expected to be given a wide berth, to be treated like a contamination. We filed toward the elevators, the silence thick and heavy. I was bracing myself for the most excruciating elevator ride of my life. As we waited for the doors to open, Juror Number 4, the man in the expensive suit, who I was sure despised me, cleared his throat. "That accountant," he said to no one in particular. "I think I have the same glasses as him." Juror 6 chuckled. "Hope you have a better haircut." The elevator arrived, and we all shuffled in. A few more people murmured comments about the traffic, the weather, the day's boring testimony. No one looked at me. No one mentioned a thing. They were just ignoring it, willfully, collectively, pretending the most embarrassing moment of my life had never happened. Standing on the courthouse steps a few minutes later, the cool evening air felt like a blessing. I had survived. I wasn't a pariah, just a weirdo they had all silently agreed to tolerate for the sake of getting through this trial. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. My secret was out, but the world hadn't ended. It had just gotten incredibly, profoundly awkward. I had exposed a raw, vulnerable part of myself, a part I used just to feel normal, and now it was public knowledge in this small, temporary community. It made me wonder about all of them, about the quiet, strange things they might do to keep their own heads above water when no one is looking. What's the one secret thing you rely on to get through the day, and what would you do if everyone found out? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.